I want to mention something about the delivery of legal services and the cost of legal services. When I got out of law school, there were 300,000 lawyers in the United States. Today, there are about 1.5 million. We've had about a 5-fold increase when you count in paralegals, because when I got out of law school, there was no such thing as a paralegal. And now there are about 300,000. So you got 1.2 million of lawyers, and you have 300,000 paralegals. So the total individuals now providing legal services has increased by a factor of 5. Now, what does the law of supply and demand tell us? When the supply of something, whether it's boxcars or cattle or engineering services or medical services or legal services, when the supply of that goes up, what is supposed to happen to the price? It's supposed to go down. Now, we've had a 5-fold increase, but I'm not done. Because now we have something more than lawyers and paralegals delivering legal services. Who else delivers legal services? Have you ever seen an ad on TV for LegalZoom? Of course you have. And they'll do a will, and I actually did one with shipping and postage, $71. But you've heard of LegalZoom. Do you know that there are 20 other companies that offer those? They're not law firms, and in fact there are now lawsuits against them saying you're engaged in the unauthorized practice of law. I think the story is over. I think the genie is out of the bottle on that. LegalZoom has been around for a dozen years. These are the first lawsuits. I do not suspect that they're going to be successful. And every day there's more and more offered for free. By the way, Dave says have your seminars. It's terrific, and that's true. But you know where else your clients can get information? Right on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you type in revocable trust, irrevocable life insurance trust, estate planning, taxable gifts, you will get dozens of videos that lawyers have already put for free on YouTube. So that's more legal services that are being provided, and it's not by individuals sitting in a room. It's another way. In California, they have something called legal document assistants, LDAs, and those are people who usually were former paralegals. They're not lawyers. They don't work under the supervision of a lawyer, but they're been permitted by California to deliver certain legal documents. Now they say, well, they're delivering a document. They're not really giving legal service. Yes, it's a will. Yes, it's articles of incorporation. But because California has stated these men and women are not really practicing law, they're not delivering legal services, they're merely delivering legal forms. I mean, you couldn't go to a drugstore and say, give me a Bloomberg form for a New York power of attorney and claim that the drugstore is engaged in the practice of law in New York. So that's what LegalZoom and its competitors and what the legal document assistants are doing in California, and I think the cat is out of the bag. The bottom line is that the internet is basically meaning that lawyers have lost their monopoly on the delivery of certain documents. Now again, in California they say if it doesn't fit pretty clearly in the document, you've got to send them off to a lawyer. I'm not sure that happens every time that someone raises a question which the legal document assistant can't answer readily. But that's something that you've got to take into account, and what it means is you have to be more efficient than ever. Because you can't say, oh, I'm going to get my quill pen or my electric typewriter or even my document assembly system and do it all, because you're just not going to be able to compete. In fact, Dave, I don't know this, but I'll bet you have lost some of your potential clients to places like LegalZoom. They go in and say, well, gee, Dave wants $750 for this will. Gee, I saw this ad on TV last night, $69, and with the shipping it's $71. Why don't we do it on LegalZoom? And by the way, to a layperson, it's going to look very, very similar because they use a document assembly system, or so it seems to me. They ask questions, they have help screens, and most lay people who don't understand the importance of making the better decisions, the right decision, think, why should I pay Dave $750 when I can get it at LegalZoom right from my home office for $71? So that's the kind of competition that is happening today, and it's really going to change the face of legal practice. Now, you might say, yeah, but they need my judgment. They have to come to me, and I have to tell them, whether you tell them directly or you use the very smooth way that Dave does it, on what you really need and what you need to do. Well, in our system that Mike and Trish and I are involved with, we actually have the computer give the lawyer advice as to what the client needs. If you've never done, for example, a grantor retained annuity trust, or you've never done a charitable lead trust, or a charitable remainder trust, or an installment sale to a grantor trust, or you're not sure what should happen to a policy of insurance on the client's life, our system will allow you to go in and it will ask you, the lawyer, a series of questions, legal questions, and it gives you advice about how to answer those. Kind of personal questions like, is the client going to regret irrevocably putting money into a charitable remainder trust where he or she can never get it back? And financial decisions. For example, if you're doing a personal residence trust, it's going to ask, what does the client think is going to happen to the value of the home in the future? It's going to go down? It's going to stay the same? Is it going to go up? And then the computer will use all that information and draw a conclusion, give it to the lawyer, and perhaps most important, tell the lawyer why that conclusion and not another conclusion was reached. Now again, we started doing this more than a dozen years ago, so the technology is there. And one of the things that I envision in the future is even in areas like elder law, people will be asked questions and they say, this is what you should do. You should have this spend down program. You're a single person, you got a nice home, why not give away the remainder and keep the life estate? And it will even run the numbers for you. That will happen. And you have to be part of it because, again, I am telling you, if you get behind the curve change, you're not going to be able to compete because you've got competition from all over the place. Plus, I haven't even mentioned, you know who our biggest competitors are for people like Mike and me? It's the large accounting firms. There's a big history about why accountants are permitted to go ahead and be involved with things like tax advice. But again, the legal industry gave it up to the accountants years ago. And they say, well, you know, if you're giving tax advice, you've got to also talk about the ramifications. And tax advice includes things like estate tax and gift tax and generation skipping transfer tax. All of those things are going to happen. And accounting firms now offer more in the way of tax-related legal services, including estate tax planning advice, than all the lawyers put together. It's a big change. Now, another big change, which is going to be almost immediate, does relate to estate tax planning. When I got out of law school, when Mike got out of law school, the estate tax exemption was $60,000, and the federal rates alone got up to 77%. If you lived in a state like New York, it was 82%. And by the way, there wasn't that much planning going on. A revolution in 1976 occurred where they increased the exemption from $60,000 to $175,000. Extraordinary, a tripling of this exemption. And then when Ronald Reagan came in, he increased it by more than 3 times to $600,000. In fact, there were some law firms, in fact, Molly knows of one, that closed down their practice because the market they were going after just didn't need any estate tax planning advice with an exemption of $600,000. Also brought in the unlimited marital deduction. And in fact, it also had a tremendous ripple effect on the life insurance industry because people who were buying life insurance to fund estate tax, now that pool of need went down. George Bush becomes president of the United States. And in fact, you may remember that George had to be crowned as president by the Supreme Court in December of 2000, and the Supreme Court said, George, you are going to be president of the United States. And that evening on the news he said, my #1 domestic agenda is the repeal of the onerous, hated estate tax. It will be gone. And indeed, the next year, 2001, we got this tax law called EGTRA, which brought income tax rates down from 39.6 to 35%, capital gains tax rates and taxes on dividends down to 15%, an extraordinary event, biggest tax cuts in the nation's history. And then they did put in a repeal of estate tax, but it wasn't supposed to happen until 2010. And everybody knew it would never happen. Everybody knew Congress would never let it happen. Well, Mike and Trish and I in our program since 2001 had a question. Do you want to take into account that maybe in 2010 there will be no estate tax and put in some special provisions? And I don't know how many of our customers did it, but there was no other system in the world that offered that. And I would guess, Mike, what do you think? 98 out of 100 lawyers just ignored it?